You're not raising kids. Stop saying I'm raising kids. You're raising adults. Also, you're not raising boys. You're raising men. I realized about 5 years ago, I was raising a parent. I was raising somebody who was going to be a parent. I mean, you start thinking like this, and just the simple change in the terminology. I'm raising a husband. I'm raising a parent. Hell, I'm raising a grandfather. My son will be a grandfather one day, probably. So you start thinking like this. My job isn't to just get him to get straight A's in school and be a good catcher and switch hitter on the baseball team. It's more than that. I'm training him to be a man. And we don't have those rite of passages anymore. We don't have to I don't send my son out into the wilderness to go catch a deer barefoot with a spear anymore. Like, we don't do those things. So what do?
Conor, as a father of 16 children, what is the biggest misconception that people have when it comes to running a large family?
The biggest misconception. It's funny. Maybe you're looking for something a little bit more philosophical or something, but I think the first thing that comes to my mind is people think it's a game or a challenge, as if my wife and I said when we got married, hey, we're going to have 16 children and that's the goal. And it was never a goal. And so this was not something that we were aiming to do. This was not something that we foresaw. And so, it was just something that we assessed after each child. We assessed, okay, how's my wife particularly? How's she physically, psychologically? How the dynamics of our family? And then we were open to having another child. So I think the biggest misconception is that people think that we were aiming to have the biggest family possible, and it's kind of aggravating, I think, when people think that, Frank, because we have absolutely no thought in our brain that having more kids is like objectively better than having fewer kids, right? Or that, if I have 16 kids, then I work harder than the dad that has 2 kids. That's bullshit. It's not the way it worked. If you have 1 kid, you're 100% dad. If you have 16, you're 100% dad. Yeah, my time's divided up separately. So maybe the misconception is that people think that we think about it differently than we do. We think about it the same way you think about if you have 1 kid, 2, 3. It's the same dynamic in my brain as it is in any other dad's brain.
Yeah, I love that, man. And no, I wasn't aiming at anything philosophical. I wanted the first thing that kind of came to mind, but I would assume, right? People from the outside, where do they see you? Maybe, they see you guys all at an event together, or they see you, maybe at church, or, just kind of that bypassing, family. It's like, that's gotta be hard, right? So I do assume that there probably is this belief that 3 is harder than 2, right? And 16, damn, that's gotta be a lot harder than a smaller family. But I think getting into some of your work here in the book and what you're doing with What Our Family is going to hopefully reveal to us that once you have the systems in place, management becomes management, whether it's 1 or 15.
Yeah, let me relate it. It's funny. I forget who it was, but it was one of these like ultra super marathon runners who runs it in like nearly two hours, 2 hours and 10 minutes. One of these top guys. And somebody asked him in an interview, I can't remember the guy's name, but I saw it. And he said, how can you run a marathon in 2+ hours, 2 hours and 10 minutes? And then he said, how does somebody run for 4?
Exactly. Yeah.
I can't run for 4. That's way too long, and it showed this amazing shift in their brain, right? It was you were looking at it from a different perspective. And so we kind of look at it like that. And so, I think I tell parents that have 4, 5, 6, 7 kids and they're all little, like, you guys are in the hardest spot because you don't have any teenagers who can help babysit yet. You have a lot of kids, but you're still able to kind of do a ton of stuff. You're all playing a ton of sports. You're all in school. You're all these. Well, when you get to be a huge family, it forces you to opt out of a lot of things, and you have to be really selective in what you do. My kids do CrossFit. Like my oldest is a certified CrossFit instructor, which is kind of cool. He did that in high school, which is awesome. And so my 10-year-old, he's in a CrossFit class. So they don't play as many organized sports until they get a little older, and the 15 or so, and the 16-year-old's able to drive them and stuff. But we're not on the little league field anymore. And we also homeschool. So imagine us having to deal with 7 teachers for all the kids. We'd go crazy. So we're kind of like that athlete that's running a 2-hour marathon, because we're like, actually, it's easier than the guy who's doing 4 hours. We look at families with 5 or 6 kids. We're like, oh man, they're so screwed. They're so screwed because they're doing everything and we can't. So we don't even try. So there's a freedom that comes with the huge family, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely, man. And there's got to be this element too, where you guys are now in, I don't know what would be the third, fourth, fifth phase of kind of raising the younger ones. I know the ages that your kids are spans this huge age demographic, but it's like, you've realized like the things that work and the things that don't work. Like you've had to eliminate a lot of the inefficiencies, I would assume, in every single area.
Yeah,
Life, right?
it's like any expertise in life. I mean, you find anybody, what's the Malcolm Gladwell famous book called Outliers?
Outliers, yeah.
Yeah, awesome book. And he talks about the 10,000 hour rule. And it takes 10,000 hours to become a true expert at something. Like, and you really can't do it in shorter than that, right? So whether you're the Beatles or whether you're Magic Johnson, with ball handling and passing, or whether you're a golfer or whatever it is, a painter is not going to be a world-class painter unless they've been putting, 1,000 hours a year for 10 years into this. You know what I mean? Something like that, right? And so I think that's true. I mean, given the amount of hours we put into this, our oldest is 22. We got 2 grandkids now. We're seeing, oh my gosh, look at the stupid mistakes we've made. With the older kids, I call them the lab rats, because we experimented on them. And, there's a lot of part of being, Frank, like love and suffering are 2 sides of the same coin. And so when you deeply love somebody, there's a necessary suffering that just comes with that, right? I mean, think about it. Even if you love fitness, you're going to love it so much that you suffer because you push yourself to the next level, and that which involves suffering. Anything that you truly love, you're going to throw yourself into it so much you suffer for it. So, when I look at my older kids who are great kids, so proud of them, they're starting their own families. But I look and see the mistakes I made as a dad and still do. It's just, oh my God. And then you make a rookie mistake after all this experience. I was telling you, in the last 12 months, I have been on 62 media appearances and 13 in-person presentations about parenting. And yet I still act like a total dumbass rookie sometimes with my little kids. The other day, little David, that kid has some damn problem going to bed on time. Like, it's just World War III every time I send him to bed. And so I'm asleep, I'm dead asleep. And then I find out that this kid's wandering around downstairs and I just go nuclear on him. And so, but I went nuclear on him in a way that I did 20 years ago when I was a brand new stupid dad. And I'm like, haven't I made any headway? Why am I still making the same stupid mistakes after all these years? And it's less frequent. I'm not as bad as I used to be. Maybe I've made headway in some ways, but every once in a while, you do something totally stupid, you fail, you fall into sin, whether that's lust or anger or pride or whatever it is, and that happens so that you can humbly reset and say, I'm not nearly as good as I thought I was. I've made headway. I'm an alcoholic, and I've been sober 23 years in AA. And when I was relapsing early on, my sponsor, Frank, he told me something that was one of the most powerful things somebody ever told me, because you have to humble yourself. You have to go get a stupid white chip all over again, admit to people that you relapsed. But he looked at me and I was down. He said, Conor, you didn't lose everything. You didn't lose everything. So even when I blow up at little David for not going to bed on time, I didn't lose everything that I've gained as a parent. And I just have to be humble enough to try to learn from it, because I still make the same mistakes over and over again.
Yeah, I appreciate the transparency and vulnerability there. I think a lot of times when we bring experts on the show, when we bring people that have books and are running organizations, sometimes the perception from the audience, right, is this guy's got it all figured out. I'll never be him, right? I'll never be, well-ordered family because I don't have 16 kids. I don't have experience in running multiple companies. So I can hear some of this stuff, right? But I'm going to fall short. And to hear from the person that's written the book on running a family like a business, hey, I don't have all this figured out. I'm figuring this out along the journey with you guys, I think brings the conversation down to where now the audience can be like, okay, it's a real dude here, right? Dude, struggled with alcoholism, right? That's going to be a core of our audience, like guys that are struggling with addiction, right? So they're going to be able to resonate, I think, a lot with your story. And then I think bringing that vulnerability to the conversation will help the guys really say like, okay, I can get this. I'm not chasing perfection. I'm chasing a little bit of improvement time over time. So I really, really do appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. If you made 1% improvement every 90 days, then you'd have 100% improvement in 25 years. That's, 1% is not that intimidating. You know what I mean? It's really not that intimidating. Now, I want to be better than that. But, Bill Gates said, speaking of business and family and everything, Bill Gates said, we overestimate what we can do in a year and we underestimate what we can do in 10 years. Man, is that true? I don't like much of what comes out of Bill Gates' mouth most of the time, but that is dead on, right? And so here we are. We're talking early in the new year, and I'm sitting here trying to say, what are my goals? And I am like chronically overstretching goals, man. And even if, like, in my younger days, if it was fitness, I'd get injured inevitably, because I'd push it too hard. And I'm 45, getting older now. I'm learning to appreciate the beauty of simpler goals that I'm more likely to accomplish. Fewer goals I'm more likely to accomplish. If everything is important, nothing is important. And so if you want to be excellent at something, you need to do one thing. You need to get very focused. And in parenting, it's the same thing. Like, what is the goal here in our family life? It's the same with any relationship you have. You have any kind of significant other, any kind of parent, any kind of sibling, any kind of colleague, whoever it is. What is the purpose of this relationship? What's my goal with this relationship? And whether you got 1 or 16 kids, parents, you should figure out what that goal is and work towards it.
Yeah, zero in right there on goals. To the guys listening right now. As we're saying, it's early 2025, right? People are kind of setting the tone for this is going to be a year, right? This is going to be the year I'm going to become the dad that my kids need to be. I'm going to be the husband that my wife needs me to be. For the men out there that are listening right now and our fathers, what's the one thing that they can be focusing on this year that's going to maybe make them that 1% better, maybe quarterly, monthly, yearly, in the area of fathering, running a family? The one key thing that a guy should be or can be focusing on, in your opinion?
Oh, geez, that's hard. Pause the show and come back in 30 minutes. Let me think about it. No, I would say, I guess, all right, this is a frustrating answer. Your goal should be to have a goal. Right? Think about it. Think about if you were talking about nutrition with your guys, right? And are they at a spot where they can actually choose like all their macros, meal plan, or is it like, guys, track everything you eat and we'll figure out later on where we're taking this? But you got to start. Showing up is half the battle. Remember the old G.I. Joe commercials when we were little kid? That's my age. But it's like, knowledge is half the battle. That's what they'd always have in the cartoons. But, my point is this. A good goal for fathers is to begin to, I got to make it more tailored, but is to write down goals for your family. That's the goal, is just write down the stupid goals and track them, right? So, Atomic Habits, famous book, right? The whole thing is about just choose these little things that will have, atomic results. So I have a number of tools on wellorderfamily.com where you're able to see, okay, what are your quarterly goals here? Having a quarterly meeting and choosing a couple, what I call rocks, that comes from business language. EOS uses the term rocks for their quarterly goals. Are you familiar with the analogy of the rocks as a goal? Have you heard of that rock thing?
Like big rocks, little rock. You fill the jar with big rocks,
yes,
and then it kind of fills it up with the sand, and then the water pours it in. 100%.
You got it.
Yeah,
you got it. You got it. Sure. So what are those rocks? Those first things you pour in the jar, right? It's the same thing as like you pack a suitcase, you put your big stuff in first, not the little stuff. And so the goal for the guys should be this. Okay, I've narrowed down. My brain's gotten clear. It was a great question. I should have known the answer like that, but I didn't. So it's you need quarterly goals, just like you need quarterly goals at work. Well, how do you express those quarterly goals? You need a quarterly meeting with your family. 4 meetings. Okay, here's a simple goal. Meet with your spouse tonight or your significant other, whatever, and get your phone out and put 4 quarterly meetings in the calendar. It's early January. Pick one now, like in the first couple weeks of January. Pick one 90 days out, and then another 90 days, and have another one at the end of the year. 4 quarterly goals. And I want you to start thinking about the rhythm of your family like you do a business. We know business all focuses on quarterly returns and quarterly performance, quarterly goals. The goal is to start that practice with your family. And so what are you doing in that family meeting? Well, I have agendas. So on welderfamily.com, go to the little toolbar on for Unity, and you can print off the family agendas or these little family meeting agendas. So at a quarterly meeting, you're going to say, what are our quarterly goals? What are the goals of my family over the next 90 days? Okay. Now on my family scorecard, Frank, I got, you're a fitness guy, so I like talking about this, but I had type 2 diabetes like 3 years ago, two years ago, and I was fat. I was 240 pounds, probably pushing 30% body fat. And so, I went, the doctor felt like crap. And he's like, yeah, you got type 2, A1C was too high. And so I didn't really do anything. By the way, this is a total aside, but you'll appreciate it. So I'm reading a book about diabetes. And because I was like, okay, I need to learn about this thing. I didn't change anything right away. But I'm reading this book on diabetes, and it said, if you have type 2 before you're like 42 years old, and I was like right at 42, he said, then you have a 50% chance before the age of retirement of A, having a heart attack. And I'm like, I know a lot of people. I get a stent. It's okay. B, have a stroke. I'm like, nah, probably won't happen to me. And then C, having your feet amputated. And I was like, oh, shit. I was like, I cannot have my feet cut off, man. That would totally suck. Why is it I care more about my feet than my heart and brain? I mean, how stupid. You know what I mean? Like stroke and heart attack just sounded, just like conceptual, right? But then I was looking at my damn bare feet reading this book, and I'm like, I cannot imagine somebody taking a freaking saw and cutting these things off. It was so visceral. And I got my fat ass off the couch and I started working out. And, I did keto. I lost a ton of weight super fast, gained it back. And so I got with a dietitian and started really doing this through a more balanced diet, tracking my macros. And I'm down to 17% body fat, a perfect A1C. I've maintained all my muscle and lost 30 pounds of fat. So it's, man, I feel great. And I've, but why am I bringing up all that? It's because I started tracking on my family scorecard, which I use to track different metrics for the family. I put my body fat percentage goals on the family scorecard. So my whole family can see my body fat percentage goals. Okay. And it's been ticking away over the past couple of quarters. And I look at it, and when I get weighed in on the InBody scanner that does all the metrics of your body, I write it in. So the goal for the guys should be create your goals and measure them and track them every 90 days. And guys, you do this in every area of your life. Anytime, Frank, anytime anyone on any part of the planet at any time in history decides to be really good at something, they measure with precision. I'm talking about the engineers of the freaking pyramids, man. They learned how to measure things with precision. If you're a bodybuilder, you learn how to measure everything with precision. If you're a great investor, if you're a great musician, if you're a great anything, you learn to measure with precision. Do you want to be a great family man? And if you do, you have to measure something. And I'm not going to tell you what that is, because you're smart enough, guys, to figure out what you need to measure and start tracking it. Otherwise, you're not going to become truly great at it any more than you would at any other part of life without measuring.
Do you think this stems from, we've done so many episodes here. I think I mentioned we're at episode 278 here. We've had all the relationship experts, all the marriage counselors, right? And I remember Tony DiLorenzo, a great friend of mine, talked about in marriage, most people place the goal as the I do. Right. It's like you date somebody, you meet her, I'm attracted to her. Like, if I can get to I do, then I win the game. It's like, no, the I do is the beginning. And it's like so many marriages fail because they haven't defined what a successful marriage to them is. Like, what does 5 years into our marriage supposed to look like? Do you think a lot of this stems from people not having a clear objective of what being a successful family man even is?
Yeah, dude, absolutely. I think that, those old fashioned vows, brother, until death do us part, sickness or health. I remember my wife and I, we got married. We go down to Florida for our honeymoon, and honeymoon's a pretty big deal. And this, as soon as we get we get on the plane, we're going down on our honeymoon, and she gets a nasty stomach bug. And here's this beautiful, hot woman of mine on our honeymoon, and she's in the freaking bathroom the whole honeymoon. It's like, what the hell happened here?
What did I sign up for?
Gross, dude. But it was like in sickness or in health. And so I told my son, like, this is serious shit right here, Frank. This is real serious stuff, because it's happened. I don't want to make this too sad of a podcast or whatever, but my son and my daughter have both gotten married in the last year and a half or so. And I asked both of them, I said, do you still want to marry this person, knowing that what if they got handicapped like a month after your marriage, and you have to care for them the rest of their life? Are you comfortable still committing, knowing that? Because you don't marry the woman, she gets in a car accident, and then you're like, well, that ruined my plans, I'm out of here. That's not what this is. This is a vow of your whole personal integrity on this forever. That's what this is. So, and we have some friends whose child, 21-year-old guy, had 2 little kids with his wife, who's a nurse. And about a year and a half ago, he flipped his car in the middle of the night. He wasn't drunk. It was just a fluke accident. And he's a quadriplegic from the neck down. And he can move his arms a little, but not his hands. And he was a welder. He hadn't gone to college. He was a welder. So it's like he lost his trade. And that woman who's taking care of him is a freaking saint. She's got little kids. She's working. She's changing this guy's diaper every day and still going to work. And that's marriage, my friend. That is marriage. And I see the way this woman, she suffers and loves. And the dad suffers because he can't do, a lot. And he suffers even more psychologically, I think, than physically. But my point is, men have to go into a marriage understanding that that's possible. And are they willing and able to sacrifice themselves for this person? Think about the military. Think about, no one would join the police force today in Baltimore without the idea of I could lose my life. I could lose my life. I'm going to walk into very difficult situations. You cannot go into marriage today without understanding this isn't about saying I do. This is about getting the person to the grave. That's what it's about. And mission accomplished, not when you say I do, not when you have kids. Mission accomplished when one of you is buried and in a holy state of life. That's the mission. That's the completion. That's the fulfillment. And everything we do along the way is just the point to die well. All of living is for the purpose of dying well.
Man, that's a deep statement right there. Is there something that a man coach and mentor a lot of young men here through the podcast, through Rebuilt Recovery? It's our core, I guess, paying demographic is young men that are finding their way through life, whether it's breaking the addiction or setting path on becoming the man that God has called them to be. I think a lot of the crisis we see in young men today is due to lack of initiation, right? Like we've taken some things out of maturing that, for a long time, we're just a part of societal evolution. Right? Like in order to become a man, like for a long time, like you had to go do manly things. So are there things
the rite of passage, like a rite of
rite of passages? Exactly. Right. So are there things that men early on in life can be doing to prepare themselves for these sacrifices that you're speaking to, that we're going to have to make if we're truly going to succeed at leading a family?
Yeah, there's a lot of things. And I got 8 boys, 8 girls. So I definitely think about my boys differently. I always joke, I prefer my daughters. I like the girls better. But, as a man, I think about my son, and as a dad out there, for the dads, you're not raising kids. Stop saying I'm raising kids. You're raising adults. And then also you're not raising boys, you're raising men. And now, I realized about 5 years ago, I was raising a parent. I was raising somebody who was going to be a parent. I mean, you start thinking like this, and just the simple change in the terminology. I'm raising a husband. I'm raising a parent. Hell, I'm raising a grandfather. My son will be a grandfather one day, probably. So you start thinking like this, and it changes. My job isn't to just get him to get straight A's in school and be a good catcher and switch hitter on the baseball team. It's more than that. I'm training him to be a man. And we don't have those rite of passages anymore. We don't have to I don't send my son out into the wilderness to go catch a deer barefoot with a spear anymore. We don't do those things. So what do? My newest book, which isn't out yet, I've just finished the rough draft, is all about this. So I'll come back on your show in 4 months or something. And it's called this. Check this title out. Raising Blue Collar Kids in a White Collar World. Okay. And the idea isn't just that, hey, go learn how to be a craftsman. No, it's about having what I call a blue collar soul, right? A gritty, tough, manly soul that you're not this pampered, wimpy, passive man that expects people to take care of you. But, the blue, as I call it, the blue collar soul, so to speak, that's somebody who's resilient, who knows how to figure stuff out, who knows how to persevere. We have this white collar lifestyle now, like where we don't have rites of passage, right? And kids are spoiled. Now, I'm not blaming parents for having a smaller family, but one of the realities, if you got 2 or 3 kids, it's easier to do everything for them, right? You spoil them. You got more money to give to them. You got more time to give to them. Dad goes to every single little league game because he's got the time to do it. When you have a whole lot more kids, you can't, So you have to give kids chores. You have to make them earn their money. You have to, when they say, I don't know how to do this, you say, you haven't tried hard enough. Go figure it out. Everything from making my kids change their own oil to making them cut the grass. I make enough money to hire the best lawn service in town, and I make my kids do it. My 10-year-old's out there with the blower, blowing leaves. My kids work. They all get jobs, 15 or 16 years old, and I make them spend their own money on their own damn things. And even though, like, right now, 15-year-old and 17-year-old, they work at the bagel shop. They come home after a long day of washing dishes, and then guess what? If it's their day to do the dishes, they still have to do the dishes. They don't get to come home and just put their feet up. I don't get to do that. I got to go, So raise tough kids. And there's a study that just came out from Harvard, of all places, that says, Frank, there's a direct correlation between how many chores a little kid has and the success they will have as an adult. So if you want your kid to be entitled and wimpy and bail on their marriage as soon as it has trouble and quit their job and move back in with you when they're 33 because they don't like their boss telling them what to do and want government handouts and rely on everybody for everything. And if you want your kid to feel like a victim all the time, then do all their laundry, then do the dishes for them, give them a huge fat allowance for nothing, and they'll do that. Or if you want your kids to have that kind of blue collar, gritty, tough soul, then you got to sit back and make your kids work really damn hard. And by the way, that's hard on mom and dad because sometimes it's just easier to do it yourself. But you have to make that kid suffer so that he becomes his very best.
That's a challenge there, you said, man, because I think that's the one that, parents had the hardest time maybe seeing in themselves, right? It is a lot easier for maybe mom to kind of clean up the kitchen and make sure all the, grease is off the dishes. In reality, it's taken away from the development of the kids. It's a whole lot easier to get the thing done quicker, right? We're more efficient than watching the kids. We're like, we're on a time crunch, right? We got to get out of the house. No, they gotta learn these things. They gotta fail and learn and build that resiliency up. I love the entire premise of your book. The one that's coming, the blue collar one. I think I saw in 2024, the fastest growing 6-figure earners, I think, were plumbers in 2024. So there's this resurgence of a blue collar worker job that's going to be available because there's an entire generation that doesn't want to do the work. So for the ones that are willing to learn the trades, they're willing to do the hard work, they're going to be the next wave of millionaires. And I believe that to be true. I grew up in the 90s, man. I grew up before lawn care was a multi-million-dollar business. Like when I wanted something at 12 years old, like I knew I could grab the lawnmower, I could fill up a gas tank, and I could go knock on people's doors and get the things done. Like I'm so grateful that I grew up in the generation that I did.
So let me, sorry to build on that. So it's interesting when we take our kids to the athletic field. I see parents have a good mindset. They know their kids out there suffering. They want them to run hard. They want them to get tackled hard. They want them to get up. Dad's on the side of the, on the sidelines. Get up, let's go. They're making them tough. They expect their sons and daughters to be tough on the field, but then when they go home, they don't. There's a major break in their brain, and they need to take that same kind of let's go get them. You need to take that same attitude to the other areas of your life. And dad's an athlete. He's usually living vicariously through his kid. He wants the kid to be good in front of the other kids and the other dads. But every dad understands why they want their son to be a tough athlete. And any dad worth his salt would care more about his son being a hustler than an actual performer, right? I mean, wouldn't you rather your son be the hardest? Would you rather your son get the MVP or the hustle award? I would rather my son get the hustle award, right? Top scorer on the basketball court, or the guy who dove into the bleachers 10 times to get the ball, right? That's the kid I want, right? And I think a lot of parents can resonate with that. The point is that doesn't just stop on the field or the court. Take it to the kitchen, take it to their bedroom, take it to their academics, take it to the yard work, take it everywhere else. Teach them to be tough and strong and resilient and hustle everywhere else, not just in athletics. And if parents would do that, their kids would be very different.
I would argue, and I don't have experience here because I'm not a parent, that in fact, if you teach that stuff in the other areas of the life, it's going to come out on the field. You don't teach it on the field and then expect it to show up at home. You teach it at home and it shows up on the field because it's embodied in the character of the kid.
Thank you. It's in the character. Yeah, I mean, can you really let them be a couch potato and lazy and entitled at home and play video games all day, and then they get to the football field and their coach starts busting their chops? You think they're going to be resilient to that? Exactly. So this is you're conditioning the human soul. That's what you're doing, no matter where you are. And it's just sports is kind of an easy way to do it. But what I'm sitting here preaching about all over the country is there's all these other places you can do it. What if your kid doesn't have legs? You don't think they can be strong and persevere and have tremendous care? Of course they can. They don't have to be an athlete to have that resilience. If they can do both, great. But dads are really good at this when it comes to sports and terrible about it everywhere else.
Here's what I'm curious your thoughts. This is we're kind of going on a tangent here, but I like where we're at right now. This is one that I've seen, and I'm not a big fan of it. I did spend some time coaching youth sports a couple years ago. My nephew was 10, 11, 12 years old. I had an amazing relationship with him. My sister gave me the opportunity to be his little league coach, which was amazing because I got to build a relationship with him, but I got to coach and mentor a lot of young boys as well. And I would see this reoccurring theme sometimes in parents where they would use running or physical exercise as a punishment. And as somebody that loves fitness, right? You see the trophies over my shoulder, man. It has been the biggest thing that changed my life at 15 years old was finding the gym. But I have a healthy relationship with it. I don't think it should be a punishment. I'm curious for you as raising as much kids. I know your wife is in incredible shape. I think she has been her entire life. I know you found this new love for passion, fitness as well. Where do you see that as terms of like, you want your kids to be healthy and in shape and disciplined, but you don't go run a mile because you struck out. Like that doesn't make a whole lot of sense in my opinion.
It's ridiculous. Yeah, it's ridiculous. So I have seen those kinds of parents before. Now with one caveat. So when my kids are in the house, who's the cartoon, the Speedy Gonzales or the Tasmanian Devil? That's what I'm looking for, right? The old cartoons where we get these little tornadoes going through the house and my 7-year-old twins are just wreaking havoc and destroying the house. And they got too much damn energy and they've been inside all day. I'm like, guys, it's PE time, right? So we're going outside, 10 laps around the house, and every lap you do 10 burpees when you get to the front porch and keep going. And I will put my kids through a little fun outside, hey, we're going to bust it up. And because they have to get the hell out of the house and stop driving but never as like a punishment, especially for poor athletics. Now, look, if a coach, I think my favorite thing to see is like my dad was a great college basketball player. And he says that one day in high school, the team lost the game. They were lazy. They didn't hustle. So at the end of the game, in front of all the stands, the coach made them do wind sprints, suicides, right after the game because they didn't hustle. They didn't hustle.
Lack of effort. Yeah.
Lack of effort. You're running suicides in front of the other team. I thought that was awesome. But no, I hear what you're saying. Parents do it all wrong very often, but it's not a discipline thing, but I have to get the kids out and make them run just to burn off the energy.
Of course, sure. Yeah, and that's a healthy outlet for it. Yeah, I want to circle back and talk a little bit about the relationship between you and your wife. You kind of teed up at the beginning that maybe the misconception around you and the perception of the family is like you guys had all this plan. Conor showed up on date one looking for the woman. I was like, I'm going to have 16 kids. I need to find the woman that's going to do it with me. You said it wasn't really how you guys had it planned out. What was that early kind of conversation? I'm sure you guys had talked about, we want at least to have a big family, or was this like we want a kid and then like we've taken it one at a time, or what was the initial conversation, and at what point did you guys look at each other and say, okay, we're all in on this thing, we're going?
Yeah I don't really know. I mean, it's funny because I think that we were attracted to large families, and I just don't remember a single conversation, Frank, where we're like, yeah, we're gonna have a bunch of kids. I don't think it was that, but probably because I was so self-absorbed, right? We get married. I go to law school right away. And I was a freaking terrible husband for the first 5 years, probably. I was just so consumed in my own life. It's interesting. One of my mentors, who was actually a great point guard for Clemson long time ago, and now he's a federal judge who I used to clerk for. And he shared the story with me of how he thinks back to his second or third year of marriage, and he remembers what was going on. He was in law school, and he remembers the year perfectly. They met these different friends. He got good grades. He was on an intramural basketball team, and they won the championship. And he tells all these things, after college and stuff. And then he found a letter that his wife had written him the same year. And he's looking at this like 20 years later, and his young wife with a couple little kids was explaining to him in this letter what a miserable year it had been for her. And my point is like, in his memory, it was this amazing year. In her, it was a terrible year. And he told me, I didn't even recognize that it was a terrible year for her. I was just so consumed with my own life. And I did the exact same thing. So early in my marriage, I was getting my law degree. I had a part-time job. I was getting a master's in philosophy. I'm in DC, so I'm working for Congress and like trying to be all big shit. And I thought I was so impressed with myself. And my wife is stuck in an apartment with a baby and then another baby. And so, I just don't think that I was planning out. I didn't have much of a vision for where I wanted to go. And I think she was just so young and inexperienced. I don't think she did either. But after a couple kids, pretty quickly, you start saying, eventually you sit down and like you start doing the math. I'm like, wait a minute. We just had our third kid in 4.5 years or something. If we kept doing this, what would the math be? And so it took a while for us to start thinking that. But even then, at the fifth kid, maybe sixth kid, my wife, she's never been fat, but she was for her, she was out of shape. And she was, taking naps, dealing with all these little kids. And she realized, I can't keep going like this. So she got, no kidding, man, she just flipped a switch in her head and she bought Tony Horton's P90X DVDs. And she has spent more time with Tony Horton in her life than with me. Okay. But she started doing those exercises, watching the videos. And because she realized, if I'm going to keep having children, I cannot keep kind of going downhill. This is a physically demanding thing, and I got to up my game. So I remember she's like, no more napping. I'm working out instead of napping. I'm going to get my energy boost from the endorphins from working out than taking a nap, And so like kid 5 or 6, she just totally changed. And I remember I worked out with her one day, like the first time I worked out with her in the garage doing P90X, I puked my guts, literally barfed in the bush outside of the garage, literally. Okay. No figurative. It was chest and back, and I puked my guts out. And so she's been a rock solid kind of thing ever since then. It took me much, much longer to kind of get serious about stuff. But again, just to kind of go back to the question, I don't think we had a vision. It was something that slowly evolved over time. And then you have to make life adjustments to realize that. I don't know if that really answered it, but there you go.
No. That's either one of you come from bigger families?
Well, I had 6 in my family. I was one of 6, and my wife had one sister. So, she had no experience with this at all. I had held more babies, before than she had. So, you don't need to have a large family to have you don't need to come from a large family to have a large family, and I think that, in fact, sometimes when women have come from a large family, like they have even more preconceived ideas on exactly how it's supposed to be. And so because, well, my mother was awesome and she had 5 kids and she did it just like this, so I have to do it just like this. And Ashley, she was starting from a blank canvas. You know what I mean? So it's almost, I tell people, like, don't read too many parenting books, man. This is something that's so natural in you. Don't fall in love with some theory, just let your love kind of naturally progress and you'll figure it out. So sometimes coming from a small family is even better because you don't have all the narratives in your head already.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's take that and let's transition that into maybe the one book that you recommend they all do read out there, right? Which is The Well-Ordered Family. So you've created this system here, the family management system, I think built off of 6 pillars. Curious. I mean, very successful businessman. You're running multiple businesses. Sounds like you had a background in law here as well. What was kind of the genesis of saying, okay, we had this experience at home, like let's turn this into something that can be applicable to others? Kind of walk us through the journey of actually even crafting the Well-Ordered Family.
Yeah. So, I think before we started recording, you were talking to me about how you have the notion of universal principles that kind of govern
universal success principles.
There you go. That's it, man. So I have a master's in philosophy. Yeah, I got a law degree, but my real passion was philosophy. So I studied these ancient Greeks, Plato, Aristotle, and they're really good at finding these philosophical principles that kind of govern natural law. I call it natural law, the law written into nature by Almighty God that we can't change no matter how hard we try, right? So I always looked at business from a philosophical standpoint. I never took a business class in my life, right? So when I started really trying to learn business, I read all the business books in the world that I could get my hands on. And I counted up to about 250 business books and I stopped counting after that. And literally, I read that many plus way more than that. But what I naturally did, Frank, is I found key principles that ran through all of the success stories. My favorite genre of book for a long time was the biography of businesses, right? So there's like books about businesses. And I love reading those because you're seeing a 30 or 40 year journey, but I would be like investigating it like Sherlock Holmes saying, ooh, where's the secret sauce that's kind of running through this? And I saw they always have vision. They always had this like powerful vision, no matter what. And sometimes it would shift, but the general principles of their vision, like their ultimate goal still was usually the same day one as it was day 1,000. It's just like sometimes the strategy would change, but the vision was clear. They also had incredible collaboration with a key group of executives, right? Oh, it would take a long time, but that's the unity part of my system. And they would have, like, Jim Collins says that 1% of success is vision. 99% of success is unity around the vision. Okay. So, do you need a good vision statement? Yeah. How much good does it do you if you are not on the same page with your partners? Not much good at all. So that unity or alignment, all these businesses had this core group of executives that traveled a long time with them, right? Staff may come and go, but the key team usually was pretty darn stable. And then I found that they figured out what to measure. Like we were talking about, they got really dialed in on measurements, and that's the metrics, right? So they would have scorecards. They would be tracking their customer retention rate, lifetime value, what financial metrics, like, and the CEO, the leader, the visionary, Frank, he could not keep 15 different numbers in his head at all times. So all the visionaries over a long period of time, they would figure out 3 or 4 key things and they would zone in on those ruthlessly, and kind of let all the other stuff fly around. But they figured out 3 or 4 things that they hounded their staff about. And it's finding that those numbers, that one number, that 2, 3, 4 numbers, like what are the key things that they're really going to look at? So, I mean, imagine if we were trying to track our diet with all the, whatever you call the micronutrients like potassium and, blah, blah. All I can do is fat, proteins, and carbs. That's all I can do. You know what I mean? I can't go another level down. I would go crazy, right? So it's the same thing in business. And so metrics and then systems. I saw in business that this natural law principle, it's in every business where, good leaders point their finger and blame the system before they blame the people. And I found that same thing in family life, right? I mean, look, if I see these, relate it to fitness because I'm talking to a fitness guy, but I kind of naturally think like this. You look around and you see some 10-year-old kid wobbling into a restaurant and he's hugely obese, huge fat 10-year-old kid, right? And you can look at that kid and you say, God, look how fat that kid is. Or you can say, oh man, his system is so screwed up. Like his whole life is putting shit in his mouth all day, every day. And it's not his fault. He's 10. He's 10. And there's 10-year-old kids now that have type 2, man. I mean, it's nuts. But the parents are feeding them crap. The school's feeding them crap. It's very, very hard. And so I can look at that. Are you going to look at that kid and say it's your fault for eating stuff? Or are you going to say the system is broken? His whole ecosystem is feeding him crap. And he has no way of breaking out of that on his own yet. Hopefully later on, he can work his way through it. So when you see somebody in a business, an employee make a mistake, do you blame the employee or do you look at the system that I as the leader created and say, okay, how did I create a system that allows this person to screw up? I first look at the system, try to improve it. Now, if the system was bulletproof and the person is still at fault, well, then it's the person's fault. So, but they get the finger only secondarily. The first is at myself, which is pointing at the system. Same thing with my kids. I can't get the stinking laundry done in my house. It still sucks. It's one of the biggest stressful things in my family day to day is getting the damn laundry done. I got chore charts going like crazy. Pretty much everything else in the house runs smoothly. But for some stupid reason, the Gallagher family cannot handle the freaking laundry. Okay. And the kids keep screwing up. And my wife has a tendency to get really mad at the kids for not doing the laundry the right way. The older kids have to do the younger kids' laundry. It's just a freaking nightmare. I can't figure out the right system. And I can have a chore chart. I can write people's names and responsibility and dates on the wall. That's not a problem. But the system sucks. And there's reasons that I can't seem to get the system. So yes, I get frustrated at my kids, but I'm really frustrated at myself that I can't create a better system that's smoother and easier and more intuitive to where there's not a whole lot of figuring out what to do. So that's an example of I still am failing at the system. So I can only get a little mad at the kids because I have to be better at figuring this out. So that's systems. And then relationships. I have to, in business, of course, what is this relationship? The main thing in relationships, Frank, is good leaders always figure out how to put their people in the right positions. You can't just what if the head coach made Shaquille O'Neal a point guard? I mean, he's a freaking idiot. He can't play point guard. Does that mean he sucks at basketball? No, he's got to be in the right position. You know what I mean? So most of the time when a hardworking, rather competent person gets fired from a job, it's because they were in the wrong position. Okay. And so a leader has to focus, what is this person's natural God-given talents and abilities? And how do I, as a leader, set them up for success versus you didn't fit the prescription that I wrote for you, you're out. So same thing with kids. Man, my kids, they have so many different strengths and weaknesses. There's so many opposites. I have to realize that not all the kids are going to be good at the same thing. So that's relationships, is putting people in the right positions for success. Every athletic coach understands this. I don't know why parents don't understand it. And then lastly is discernment. So that's making decisions, right? When you're in business and money's on the line, you make pretty good decisions. You analyze, you look at the cost, the benefits, you get empirical with it, and you make analytical decisions. But at home, we just throw decisions around like it's nothing, and we make really bad decisions. And stress comes from the inability to make good decisions. So husband and wife often get in fights about what kind of, what kind of car are we going to get? Do we go on this vacation? Do we get dinner out? And the stress just spins around because there's so many decisions to be made. And when stress starts to occur, we need to stop. We need to get one of the tools out that I have on my website and be analytical, fill out the worksheet, and make a decision much more smoothly, much more empirically, just like we often do at work. We need to bring that skill home. So that's the 6-part system. You didn't really ask that, Frank. I just kind of rambled on, but that was perfect because he teed it up. And I mean, you kind of walked through the 6-pillar framework here, which I thought was an incredible kind of outline. And as you're talking here, I'm thinking just using the bodybuilding as an example, right? Starts with a vision, right? I can remember, 2015, I was, 6-7 years into competing, I'd reached kind of a point, I was in my early 30s, kind of physically peaking. I'm like,
all right, I'm 6'3". We met, I'm a bigger dude. Well, the one bodybuilder in the world that was ever over 6'2", that was any type of success, it was Arnold Schwarzenegger. I can remember that year. I had Arnold posters everywhere. I used to just, before I even started down the prep, I'm like, Arnold's physique, 6'2", 240, 6'2", 2. That was the vision. That's what I was working towards. When I stepped on stage that May, it's like I was 6'3", about 238 pounds. Like I got so close to that vision because it started there. I then brought in the unity, right? I had the team behind me. I had the coach. I had the trainer. It's like we knew the date that we were working towards. Then we brought in the metrics, right? We're tracking calories. We're tracking cardio. We're tracking all my workouts. We're tracking supplementation, everything dialed in, blood work on a consistent basis. Then we got the systems, right? Okay, it's like, how am I sleeping? Am I tracking that? What's the progress for the workouts, right? The relationships, right? Making sure that I'm getting that bucket filled and I'm not just this robotic individual here. And then the discernment, obviously having the ability to kind of manage life stress and all that stuff kind of played. But that's where that kind of like, for me, seeing all these universal success principles, didn't matter where it was. Like, so I get this, man. We're on the same page there. You mentioned the 3-4 kind of KPIs, right? Like in a business, right? Top line revenue, bottom line growth. What are we kind of spending on marketing here? Not looking at every specific number because it'd be too much to manage. Because you have the key ones that you look at on a weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually basis that really drives progress forward. When it comes to the family, though, maybe this is going to be different for everybody. So maybe it's specific to you. What are the 3-4 kind of KPIs that the Gallagher family has to pay attention to?
That's awesome, man. It's on my scorecard. And if you walked into my house, there's a pantry. As soon as you walk in through the garage, there's a pantry, and hanging on the wall is the Gallagher scorecard. And we update it every quarter, but we usually make some changes to it once a year. And so what's on that scorecard? Well, I mean, this is kind of, not overly personal, not secretive, but it's just saying it's just ours. It's customized for us. Everybody's different. Every single week, we try to pray together as a family 4 times a week. And so to say that we're going to sit down, we're Catholic, so we pray the rosary, and it's a beautiful prayer. It takes about 15 minutes together. We go through and we pray. We have special intentions for whoever we're praying for. And sometimes we even do it while we're doing the chores. Like, it's just not always overly pious or reverent, but we get it done. But there's no way I'm going to say we're going to do that 7 nights a week. Shit happens. There's too many activities. It's just stuff. Everyone's gone. So we say we aim for 4. Okay. So 4 nights a week. And I literally tally it up and cross it through. How many did we get this week? And so I track that every single week. That's one thing. Also, as I mentioned, the other KPI on there was my body fat percentage. Okay. So that's on there. The other thing,
why was that important to everybody in the family?
Well, I don't think it was, I wanted to put it on there. I don't know if it was like, it is important to them because they don't want me to die. But although I got a lot of life insurance, sometimes we joke about that, but no, I'm more valuable alive. But I needed the accountability, and I wanted them to see that I'm taking this serious. And, we're also, I'm really trying to make a transition in my family. My wife and I are both really on this. It's not that I want my family to pay attention to their body fat percentage. I want them to have the proper relationship with food. That's what I want. You know what I mean? And so it's, and that's part of the problem. By the way, I heard something the other day. I'm off topic again, but like Ozempic and those weight loss drugs, 40% of the weight loss, Frank, is muscle. 40%. And so I understand it. Maybe there's some situations where people have to do it, but it's no doubt being abused. There's no doubt that it's being abused. And so this to get, if you could just take a pill and lose weight, you're missing out on the virtue development, right? And so you became the man you are because you had to work to. What if you just take a pill and just boom, you're Arnold Schwarzenegger? You didn't become him. You're just a photocopy or something. So I think we have to. I think I want my kids to see my journey in having the proper relationship with food. The other thing on the scorecard is, this is just a very practical thing. When my kids don't do their chores the right way, we give them a financial penalty. So depending on what the violation is, you skip out on your chores, you owe me $5. Okay. You skip out on this chore, and the bigger kids, it's $20 because they know if they don't do it at all, it's $20. If they do what we call shoddy chores, they owe me $5. So we actually tally that up. And at the end of the month, pay the banker, buddy. You owe me. And so that makes them very accountable. You see, like dishes in my house.
Public accountability for everybody, kind
Yeah.
of right there forefront. I love that.
Yeah. And so we have to do it. I mean, it's just, and it's, you know, they're like, oh, I forgot. Well, look, it's every Tuesday. I mean, you can't forget stuff every Tuesday for the rest of your life. Tuesdays exist. You have to do it. I mean, you don't get to forget. You know, I'm teaching you responsibility and accountability. Yeah, it just cost you $5, but it just made you $500,000 later on the rest of your life because you're going to be a cut above your peers. Okay, so that's the way I have to see it. And I don't like taking money from my kids. I don't need their freaking money. You know, it takes more. I lose money time-wise by collecting it than I do get. It's for their development. They have to have that handing it over. They have to have that experience of handing it over. So those are some examples. And again, we're Catholic, so we go to confession. We have the sacrament of confession at church. And so we all try to go once a month. And so we keep track and we go different times in different places, but at the, you know, each month I'll say, hey, have you been? And we track. And that's a very therapeutic process because you gotta fess up to what you did. And somebody in the porn recovery field, you know, the value of fessing up to what you did and having to voice it to somebody. And then we believe there's a supernatural grace that comes from that, from God. And so I'm trying to teach my kids the routine of being humble enough to fess up to what they did, having to go and stand in a line and have to go in and tell some guy in a box, this is what I did. We find that to be very therapeutic and a source of grace. And so we track it. Why do we track it? Because we think that's a habit that we want our kids to have. So those are 4 examples of the things that we track. I think those are the only 4 things on our scorecard right now.
Yeah, no, that's great. Curious. I know this is, you know, maybe different for everybody, but what's a good start chores with kids? I mean, it can never be too early. So what's that kind of developmental process like with getting them started young, teaching that value of the work and the money? Are you giving them, you know, allowances right out of the gate, or are there just core responsibilities that you got to do just for living?
Yeah, that's great. And so I'm going to say something that sounds maybe like I'm contradicting myself, but I'm not. So we believe in giving kids a ton of allowance, but then they have to buy everything themselves. You see, that's the thing. So I'm not actually giving them more money. We give kids a lot. And then if they want to buy Chick-fil-A, they buy their Chick-fil-A. If they want to buy a new pair of tennis shoes, they buy the tennis. I'm putting money into their pocket, and they do chores and they get paid, but then they have to buy all the shit that I'd probably buy for them anyway. So I'm teaching, they can't make financial decisions and learn financial discipline if they don't have any money, right? So we pay our kids a good allowance for doing all the chores that they do. But then we really make, if they go out with their friends, they're buying everything themselves. We make them buy their own stuff, right? And if not every single time, but you get the point. And so I think that's really helped them make decisions, because they will inevitably, every one of them, except for one of my daughters who's perfect. But all the other dumbasses, you know, they all will blow their money on some stupid, I'm going to get a remote control car. And they go spend $100 on some stupid thing, and it lasts 3 days. And then they're like, well, I got to start all over again. You know what I'm saying? That's a valuable lesson. So that's how we handle the money side. Pay your kids well, and not just to store away, but so they learn to spend properly, right? Yep. And so that's one thing. And then when my kids were younger, like the older ones were younger, man, I think we had kids doing chores at 4 or 5 years old, easy by then, you know. And so we definitely have our 7-year-olds on the chore chart now. Now, in my house, the younger kids are getting lazier because we have so many older kids that have to do so.
Take care of the stuff.
Yeah, but 4 or 5 years old, your kids got to be on the chore chart. They got to start doing dishes. We have a little stool. They're like a little step stool, and so we've had definitely 6-year-olds learning how to kind of do the dishes or help their older sibling. I mean, we've had 5-year-olds vacuum. By the way, little kids love to vacuum. You know. So you can get 4 or 5-year-olds doing some significant chores, but 2-year-olds can pick up their room, right? 3-year-olds can help pick up the garage. You know, 4-year-olds can help clean out all the trash out of the minivan. You know what I mean? Whatever. I mean, don't underestimate how much your little guy can do. 2-year-old's not a baby. They can actually start participating very, very early. And they enjoy it. It gives them a sense of self-satisfaction, and it just puts them at the right pace, man. Life is all about tempo. And as a parent, what they call them, pacers. Like you have these ultra marathoners that run 200 miles and they have pacers that like pace them throughout the day. Parents are pacers, and you have to be right next to your kid from the very beginning so that your kids get on the right pace throughout the whole life. And it starts very early.
Yeah, it's slowing them down and it's regressing their progression, man. Last few questions here. We'll wrap it up, Conor. This has been amazing. You mentioned the oldest is 22, so you have experience in raising children, kind of pre-smartphone world, and then obviously post. What's that difference kind of been like? And what would you say to the newer parents that are out there that are kind of navigating the difficulty of raising children in the technology world that we live in today?
So I'm going to say this, probably the most important, especially for your audience here, in my book, and you can get it free on the website, the most important tool that we have, it's called the Digital Policy Builder. And it's simply a tool where you're going to set, as parents, you're going to set all the very specific digital policies in the house. What's allowed, who are they allowed to communicate with, when are they allowed to use their technology? And that goes for cell phones to iPads, to laptops, Xbox. You got to get real specific with your kids when you're raising kids. And then I've learned that the most important of all the questions on this tool is just what, who, when. And then I've learned from experience, Frank, that the most important question for your kids about the technology is where. It's where. Okay. So your kids are not going to be watching porn at the dining room table sitting right next to you, but they will in their bathroom, in their bedroom with 2 doors locked. You have to start thinking where. Okay. So it's almost a more important question than you can have all the protection. Like you have to have Net Nanny or the other kind of services. There's something called Covenant Eyes, all these kind of great resources, filtering technologies. Parents, please get serious about that.
Bark is great.
What's that?
Bark.
Okay,
Bark
great.
is a great app, yeah.
So you got to get serious about that, but it's not enough. You still have to have the policies in your house. And I think the most important, there's 2 that are the most important. The first is why. So I tell my kids precisely why I have these policies, and I've learned to be very direct. I want you to develop the virtue of chastity and purity. That's why I want you to have these policies. And then where. I cannot expect my 17-year-old to be Superman in his bedroom with a cell phone. There's just too many ways around it. I mean, even on YouTube, it can pique his interest. There's too many things. So I have to say where. And so we have very specific rules about where they're allowed to use their technology. And parents have to be even more, sensitive to that than they want to be, because you want to give your kids freedom and flexibility. But if they get caught into this stuff, then they're enslaved. And so you've done the exact opposite of what you want them to do. So the Digital Policy Builder helps with that. Now, when my older kids were coming through, they started having, digital phones, cell phones and stuff when they were in high school, and they got exposed to some nasty stuff on the baseball team. And it's just going to happen unless you move out to an island, mom and dad, your kids are going to get exposed to crap. Okay. So you have to, please, I beg you, be very intentional, be very specific with the rules and regulations, and put it on paper. Most conflict, Frank, between kids, teenagers, and parents over the digital stuff, it's not that the kids just broke the rules. It's that there's usually vagueness exactly what the rule is. Okay. So you can't tell your kids, no YouTube, but if they're allowed to do guitar lessons on YouTube, and if they're allowed to look up algebra, and if they're allowed to listen to music on YouTube, then you can't say no YouTube, right? I mean, it's not consistent. You have to get super specific about things. And, for example, we were having our quarterly meeting about 3 months ago. We're due for our next one. And I learned something interesting. I thought I'd go around the country talking about this crap. And I thought our digital policy was perfect. And then I found out that my 15-year-old son was listening to Joe Rogan's podcast. Now, maybe some parents are fine with that, but I'm like, I don't want my 15-year-old listening to Joe. There's too many F-bombs. It's just not, I don't want him listening to that. And I said, hey, look, if you want to listen to, go listen to Tucker Carlson, a little bit cleaner, go do that. But my point is this, I had never even questioned, Frank, my kids listening to podcasts. I hadn't thought about it. I was focused on video games and websites and Netflix. I wasn't thinking about podcasts. And so even I was like, duh, how did I miss this one? There's some raunchy stuff on podcasts. You know what I mean? So I had to start regulating podcasts. My point is that it's a never ending battle. Parents, welcome to spiritual warfare. And you must engage in the battle with specificity and intentionality with your kids. You know more about that than I do, probably, Frank, but that's my experience. And that's a major part of the systems of this, because you got to use the digital policy. Give your kids these regulations. You love them. Get specific. They'll thank you for it later on.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add that we help our men in understanding is you got to practice what you preach, right? It's like, you can't say this thing over here. You can't say no phone in the bathroom and then sit on the toilet for 27 minutes, reading the news. Like, the kid's going to be like, well, why don't you do the things that you're teaching me to do? So I love all that. This has been amazing. Guys, check out Conor's website, wellorderedfamily.com. You mentioned the book is free. Is that digital copy, hard copy on the site?
All the tools in there are free on the website. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. So Well Ordered Family, we'll link that down there in the show notes. Conor, anything else you want to plug? You mentioned a book. We're definitely going to have you back in later this year when the next book comes out. But where can the guys maybe connect with you? Where are you hanging out socially, if anywhere? These lines, if they want to go a little bit deeper in addition to the website.
Yeah, we got a great Instagram page. We're trying to build that up. So there's some great stuff, and there's a ton of my little videos on there. And the last note, I know it's time to go. Men, it's the New Year's. Pray for your spouses and pray for your children. It's not just action. It's actually prayer. Prayer will make you a better man. You got to sit down and put the time into it. You have to pray for your spouse, not just that she stop annoying you. You have to pray for everything that she needs, and you have to pray for your kids. Each one of your children, go through and say, Lord, what does this kid need from me today? I'll leave you with that. That's a very important part I just wanted to throw in there.
No, that's incredible. I appreciate that, Conor. As we wrap up today, we'd like to end every conversation here with the same and final question. Title of the show is called The Superhuman Life. So as we wrap up today, how would you define living a superhuman life?
Superhuman life. My dad always told me his definition of success, and I think it's pretty close to superhuman life, is fulfilling the duties of your station in life towards your God, your family, your work, and your community over the course of your lifetime. That's how I do it.
Amen. Guys, check out Well Ordered Family. Follow his IG. We'll have all that plugged down in the show notes. Hope you guys got value out of this one. Conor, it's been an absolute honor, brother. Look forward to connecting with you again, man. Take care, guys. We'll see you next week. Love you.